Imagine waiting 2 weeks to know if you got a like or not, or a thumbs up. In the decades before the internet, people made comics, and we reached out to each other. What was it like? This is the Sequential Artists Workshop, and these are the 90s mini comics oral history archives. Come join us as we take a longer look at those analog days when communication was a lot slower, maybe more deliberate, maybe more reckless. Who knows? It was just different. Join us as we take a look and really notice how much things have changed. Come join us on the socials. Sometimes it's Comics Workshop, sometimes it's Saw Comics. Either way, come check us out and welcome.
Hi, my name is Larned Justin, and it's May 15th, 2024, and I'm located in St. Louis, Missouri, in a little town just outside of St. Louis called Burns Mill, Missouri. And Steve, what about you?
That's a nice town. I've been to Burnsville, Missouri. It's a nice place. Yeah, everybody's so friendly there. I'm in Orlando, Florida, and it's the same exact date. And I've been here for a few decades. I was born and raised in North Carolina.
One of the questions is how long have you worked from your location? Well, I've been here since the 70s, so the 80s and 90s are included in there. So I've been in the same place all the time.
Yeah, go ahead.
That's all. I was just saying I've been in the same place for quite a while.
Yeah, I moved here in 1984. After 2 trips to Disney World, I came down here from Edenton, North Carolina, a little small town in the northeastern part of the state in North Carolina. That's where I started making comics. That's where I first learned about small press. And but I came down with my wife at the time. We visited 2 years in a row at Disney World, and I thought, this place is great. You know, I want to live here. And so I moved here, and pretty much I've been here ever since.
And I want to know, how would you describe your early comics work? And mine has pretty much always been humor, I think. That's what I've usually done. Well, attempted humor. But anyway, that's what I've done. I think you've done a little different kind of comics.
Well, right? I mean, I started out, now you're making me wish I had prepped a little better. But I started out doing comics in just pencil on and composition books with lined paper. And when I was a kid, I've been drawing comics all my life. And you're talking about the 80s, days?
Right? That was in the 80s, right? 80s?
Well, I know they were focused on the 80s and 90s, but I've been drawing. I was born in 1956, so I was doing comics ever since I'm old enough to remember. I was always drawing comics. When I first started publishing comics, the first thing I ever published was an Edgar Rice Burroughs fanzine in 1969 called The Worlds of Edgar Rice Burroughs, and then eventually I discovered the fanzine, the small press network in the early 70s, and began publishing other comics. I'm number 1 in 1973. I became chairman of the UFO. There's been a whole history of the UFO, the United Fanzine Organization. I'm chairman again. I've been off and on, but 51 years later, I'm still doing it.
Yeah, I mean, I was a little late to the party. I mean, I always could draw cartoons, but I had never even thought that I could draw an actual, comic book until one day I picked up this Fact Sheet 5.
There we go.
Number 59. That was the first one. I picked that up.
That was published. That was Mike
Gunderloy.
Gunderloy.
Back here it said comics,
Uh-huh.
It said comics.
Didn't Mike Gunderloy publish that? It was Mike
it
Gunderloy.
Seth somebody when I got it, but forgot his name now. But anyway, that was, and I looked in there and I said, people are making their own comic books? I didn't know that. I thought, heck, I might give that a try. So the first thing I ever did is this one. This is the very first one. Candid Cartoons, number 1. And if you'll notice,
it looks great,
by Will Davis. I was afraid to use my real name. I didn't know what I was getting into, what would come into my house. So I got a P.O. box, and I used Will Davis, which was Will Elder and Jack Davis, the Mad Magazine.
Right. Mad Magazine.
So I that was my name at the time. I did not know enough about what I was doing to even leave a border in the middle. I mean, everything was just squished over to the side. Half the printing wasn't there.
Is this a reprint?
Huh?
Is this a reprint or is this the original zine?
This is the original print. This is the original comic.
All right. Well, it looks pretty good.
Well, that was my original one. I didn't even know how to print on the back, so I glued the pages together front and back. I had no idea what I was doing.
That's great.
At all. So that was my first one, and then I did, after that, I had issue number 2. I did. Was a little bit better. I got a little better at it, I was making
printed on both sides?
Sin City here. Pardon me?
Did you print on both sides for this one?
This time I got it printed on both sides, but I still had a little problem with my edges. You see that? It ran all the way over to the edge of the page. Didn't leave a border.
You learn as you go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I still had a few problems. Then I did number 3, which was this one. Got a little better. Announced my real name when I got to this one. I decided I didn't need to hide from anybody. I did. So I got, it's a little better. If you can see, I've got borders now. You see on each side.
Yeah, that holds up, man. That stands the test of time. That really looks great. It looks good. Your art style, I can recognize it immediately.
Oh, thank you. Well, it's all copied from, well, not copied, but it's all Mad Magazine. I just love the artist from Mad Magazine, so that's who I am.
And you have a Robert Crumb influence as well. I've noticed that recently.
But, he didn't come around till later after, I didn't pay much attention to him until I actually started doing these. And he got his style from Will Elder, is where he got it. Yeah, Will Elder, a Mad Magazine artist, that's where Crumb says he got his style. He expanded on it a bit.
Yeah.
So I had one more. This was the end of that series. This was the last one, number 4. And that was my Norman Rockwell cover right there. The Saturday evening Candid Cartoons. So anyway, that was my start. That's how I got started.
Well, I originally was publishing comics by the Ditto method, this long abandoned method, Spirit Duplicators. Here's a comic. This is an issue of Comique, in fact. I put it in this weird plastic thing a long time ago. I probably wouldn't do that now. I'd get a real comic, but it's been filed away for a long time. Had an offset cover. This is comic. It was published by my mentor, Chuck Robinson II. But
Who did that artwork on the cover?
That was Dave Harrier. Harrier? Yeah, Dave Harrier, and he was around. This was drawn in 1971.
Wow.
So he did a lot of great stuff back then. He worked for Chuck Robinson primarily for a comic, and but he did work for a few other people, and he was a great talent. But these were published because there is a question here about somewhere. How did you print your early comics, and how did you get your comics ready for print? In those days, we printed by here's more Dave Harrier, but this is by the ditto method.
Oh, you can see the ditto. Yeah.
And you can see it's this purple ditto. They used to use it in high schools and stuff to make tests that teachers everybody had a spirit duplicator in the office somewhere, and so things were in purple. And of course, over the years, it faded. So so it's good that we eventually started finding superior printing methods. But we were all so young in those days. As I said, this is 1971. And look, you got like some excellent artwork here. I believe that's by a guy named Dale Nelson, and he was really excellent. But we had this inferior printing method.
You were already corresponding with these people and having them send you stuff so that you could put in the book. Is that what you were doing?
Oh, this was the artist. This is the art was by Randy Nelson. And I have, in fact, been in touch with Randy Nelson during the last 2 or 3 years. I found him on Facebook, and we talk about old times. But those were because there's also a question here about who influenced you and what comics were you reading anyway. So I'm jumping ahead, but it's all kind of part of the story.
Yeah.
So I was influenced.
I did. I started. That was those books I showed you for 1997, kind of late to the party, I guess. But I started, I went to Kinko's. That's how I printed those. I went to Kinko's and did that. And then later I found right near me a little print shop. And I got to talking with those guys, and they printed some comics for me. It says how big were your runs? Well, mine were like 25 copies, That's all I could really do at the print shop. But those guys were real good. They would, I just give them the pages and they'd put them in the right order and run them off for me. So
that's nice.
And I noticed, I haven't seen them for a long time, but they are still in business to this day.
Those guys.
The printers.
Those printers. You haven't used them in a long time. I mean, I was just at Kinko's and I printed out the issue number 250 of Tetragrammaton Fragments on their copy machine, covered by our great dear departed friend Larry Blake, colored by Larry Johnson. But yes, I'm still using Kinko's, although in Orlando it's pretty expensive.
Yeah, nowadays,
you get this kind of copy. It works. It's a whole lot better than the ditto method. There's some artwork by Joe Eli Corrales, our friend. I
see the other question here. We kind of got ahead of ourselves a little bit. Tell us when you first saw evidence of people making their own comics. And that goes back to fact sheet 5. This was issue number 62, and it got Tim Corrigan marked. So in this issue is where I first saw Tim Corrigan. I hope everybody knows who Tim Corrigan was, but he did the Small Press Creative Explosion.
Yeah, Small Press Comics Explosion, also called Small Press Creative Explosion.
Yeah, right there, Small Press Creative Explosion.
He took it to a limit.
I saw that, and I said, wow, I'm going to send this guy my comics so he can review them. And I did that, and he reviewed it. He was nice to me. Tim didn't have any problem of if something stunk, he said so. But yeah, he gave me a nice review, so I was happy.
Yeah, but looking at your early small press published, they didn't stink. They look great. They still hold up. I mean, you were already pretty darn good.
Well, like I say, I'd been drawing cartoons a long time before I ever realized I could do a comic book. So that's the difference. You know, I could draw the cartoon, although I wasn't very good at placing word balloons and all that. Mm-hmm. But didn't take too long to get the hang of it.
Yep. Okay. And you're still doing it. And you're probably doing it for the next 150 years.
I would think so, yeah.
Yeah.
Tell us the story of getting a comic that surprised or inspired you. Well, one of them was Byron Black's Steppenwolf.
Ooh,
if you're familiar with that, I just don't have a copy of it right in front of me. But that was one of the early comics that I got that really impressed me. And so that was kind of a start for me. Was there somebody that really influenced you?
I mentioned Chuck Robinson in comic. When I published my first, I published a couple of crude ditto zines, but the first thing that really mattered, and I've showed this in a lot of my recent videos. I'm not going to overindulge here, but I'm number 3. Well, I'm number 1. I'm sorry. Mm-hmm. Had a cover. This was in 1973. Was totally inspired by Chuck Robinson, his comic, and I borrowed half of his staff, in fact, for this issue, including people who are still around, like Steve Shipley. Chuck Robinson himself drew that cover, and Winston Leroy Jackson drew the back cover.
Did you have any of your artwork in there?
Oh, yeah, there's a bunch of my artwork in here. I was drawing a lot more back in those days. But like I've talked about this quite a bit recently, so I'm not gonna go too far in it. Where I go, I can see my artwork. I mean, this was my artwork. Featuring a character called Manton. It was
very nice.
Chuck Robinson II. Now this was ditto, and we used spirit duplicated.
You're holding that in front of your mic.
Okay, can you see it now?
Yeah.
Okay, let me back this mic up a little bit. You can see these shading techniques. Let me see what we got. Yeah, all through here, the shading techniques.
What is it?
That was, it wasn't Zipatone. They were shading plates. Everything was drawn on a Ditto Master, similar to Mimeograph, but different. And you would put the plates underneath, and you would take like a soft point pencil, a very soft point, and you would just do like that and shade over, and the dot images would pop up.
Really?
And Chuck Robinson used that a lot back in those days. So yeah, and so that's who influenced me. We even had colored Ditto Masters. Hard to see now because it's so faded, but
yeah, can't tell, but yeah. Okay.
But you see the raised dot Zipatone-like patterns. So yeah, we're going back further because we're talking about the 80s and 90s. This is the 70s. So some of us old geezers were around back in those days, by George.
And the other questions here, we kind of covered. Asked if we ever, had an issue of Fact Sheet 5. I already went through that. We did that.
I used to get those all the time. I guess I was on a permanent mailing list. I had a stack of Fact Sheet 5s like that big. But I think it was Gunderloy published it, but then somebody else took it over, which you noticed.
I think it was Seth Friedman. When my copies, Seth Friedman.
It's been quite a while. But a lot of my stuff was reviewed in there. And so he was doing similar to what Tim Corrigan was doing. Tim Corrigan just had his own method of doing it. And Tim really pulled out stops.
And it asks, speaking of Tim Corrigan, it asked, tell the story of how you met your closest friend or peer in comics. Well, I didn't know you back in '97, so it wasn't you, but it was Tim Corrigan. And I had corresponded with him a little bit, and then we both decided we were going to go to space in Columbus, Ohio.
Oh, there you
Small
go.
Press and Alternatives Comics Expo in Columbus, Ohio. And I got to meet Tim there in person. And I mean, we just hit it off right away. Both of us had the same idea about humor. He was a very funny guy. And we just hit it off. And we went to space together a couple years in a row, I remember. But it was very hard for him. He lived way around Buffalo, New York. And if the weather was the least bit bad, it was always bad. It was a little tough for him to get there. Sometimes space was earlier in the year, so we may have not gone that year. It was, on and off. But that's where we met, and that's where we became good friends. And we talked on the phone and collaborated.
That's the best way to get things done.
Yeah, we collaborated on comics together. In fact, I did a whole comic of using his characters. These are Tim Corrigan's characters drawn by me.
You drew that?
No, me. I drew it, yeah.
That's what I'm saying. You drew this as a Mighty Guy strip?
Yeah, I drew this.
It looks like Tim's work.
I know, I copied him pretty good.
Great job.
We both worked on the story together, and this is what we came up with.
Wow, that's great.
Yeah, I looked at a lot of his comics and did some of the same things he did with his, and tried to make it as much look like his as much as I could.
Wow, I've never seen that. I've seen a lot of stuff by Tim Corrigan. I've never seen this, and I could swear, right away, it looked like Tim's style. You did a fantastic job. Wow, emulating that style.
Yeah, I had a lot of fun doing that, Tim and I together. You can see it says created by Tim Corrigan. And, it says plot, finished art, and inks, Larned Justin, scripts, and letters, Tim Corrigan. He did the lettering because I'm terrible. But
that's classic. That is absolutely classic. You should reprint that. That's nice. So
that was a lot of fun. A lot of fun.
Holy cow!
So did you meet anybody in person that you kind of became friends with? I think that's what they're asking here.
I told you about comic Chuck Robinson. Chuck Robinson II. I met him in high school. I was in high school, and I heard about this English teacher who did comics, and he would have people. He would, as part of his class, he would ask everybody to do a comic, and he had like 30 people in the class, and they're all doing their own comics for the first time ever. And he was just saying, this is something you can do to be creative. But he also heard about me through the grapevine in that high school, and I was like 10th grade or something. And there was another guy. There's another guy in the school here, and he draws comics just like the real ones. That's what they said, just like the real ones, which wasn't true. But I was doing my best. But I struck a friendship with him. I used to go over to his house, and him and his wife were there, and I had other comic book friends, and we all started converging on Chuck's house. And it was the place to be. And he had a massive small press comics collection, fanzine collection, from way back to the early 1960s. A lot of great stuff by Lynn Wein, Marv Wolfman, and lots of other people, Bill Shelley. And and I learned everything from him because he taught me about, he first told me about the fanzine network. We called them fanzines in those days, the Small Press Comics Network. He's the first one that really gave me the information about that. He told me about the UFO, the first comic book co-op. It was called the BPP, Blue Plaque Publications in those days. And but that's not, that, I had heard about fanzines previously through an issue of a magazine that was published by a comic book guy, but it was on the newsstand. It was Larry Ivy, and he did Larry Ivy's Monsters and Heroes, which was a book that had comics that Larry drew, and it also had he talked about movies, King Kong, the Frankenstein series of movies from Universal days, and that kind of stuff. And somewhere in there, he mentioned he had a few pages where he talked about fanzines, Edgar Rice Burroughs fanzines, and so that was the first time I discovered that other people were making their own books from home.
Yeah.
I didn't know yet about the fanzine, the classic the comic books that people were making from home, but that's how I first learned about first publishing, which is why my first zine was an Edgar Rice Burroughs fanzine. Once I met Chuck, everything changed, and I had already been drawing my own comics, but he told me about the network. He introduced me to the Small Press Network, and I began ordering from other people. You know, you can somebody will send you a 60-page small press comic for like 25 cents. You used to paste, you could paste a quarter inside the envelope, just put tape over it and send it.
Did that. Yeah, they got a question here about who were the most significant peers in comics. Of course, we mentioned Tim Corrigan. Other people were Larry Blake, Byron Black, I mentioned. John Miller from Scotland was a kind of an influence on me, and corresponded with him quite a bit. Kel Crum, another one of the funniest guys around.
Oh, Kel Crum.
And
he's funny in person too.
Yeah, and the great Steve Willis. You know, everybody I think should know Steve Willis. And those were people that were influenced by, my influences, and people that I did get to meet and know. Never got to actually meet Steve Willis, but Steve and I interviewed him on our YouTube show. And, what affected my work, I think I mentioned this before, but it was Mad Magazine. I didn't care anything about superhero comics, never bought them, didn't pay any attention to them, but Mad Magazine, that was it for me. So, any particular publication that you really liked at the time, or were you into superheroes?
I loved Mad Magazine when I was a kid and running through my teenage years and later. I loved Mad Magazine.
Yeah.
And but I did start with superhero comics in the early 1960s, reading Superman and Superboy DC comics. Eventually discovering Marvel comics through the Avengers and the Fantastic Four and all of that stuff.
Yeah.
And that's those are my
your work, I think, didn't it? You've got superheroes that you draw.
Yeah, but there has to be a Mad Magazine influence in there somewhere, because I love Mad Magazine. I grew up with it. Don Martin just slayed me. He was the funniest guy.
Yeah. Will Elder, Jack Davis, Wally Wood. Man, those guys were so good. I mean, Wally Wood could draw.
Oh, yeah, Wally Wood, yeah.
Oh, my gosh. Yeah.
And the greats, one of the all-time greats. Well, those are all time greats.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So let's see, what else are they asking here? How did you trade or sell your comics? Well, I was terrible at distribution. I can tell you that. I did trade them. Tried to go to, like I said, we went to space, but wasn't much good at marketing my comics. Never have been. I don't know why. I have a hard time doing that. I don't know what you do, Steve, but
when I was young, these weren't even. I was in North Carolina, and then I lived for a while on a Marine base in Cherryport, North Carolina. But when I was a kid, these weren't my comics. But just as far as trading comics, I used to just a kid. I'm like 7 years old, and I would go around and I see people playing, other kids, and we start talking. We talk about comics. And then I asked them if they have any comics, and they said, yeah, and I want to have some too. And we started trading That's when the trading bug first hit. I was trading people for mainstream comics, just other kids in the neighborhood. Let's see.
Then when you got into small press, I'm sure you did a lot of trading in small press too, didn't you?
The first thing, Chuck Robinson introduced me to that network, to all the, he gave me the addresses of all these other people who worked for him back in those days. And so he said, I suggest you send them a copy of your new book, and generally they will reciprocate and they'll send you something back. So that's when I first began trading. Also, at that time, the Comics Buyer's Guide, it was called just the Buyer's Guide, TBG, later became CBG, published by Alan Light, appeared. And that was before Corrigan, that was before Fact Sheet 5, but the Comics Buyer's Guide, the Buyer's Guide, it not only it had information and ads from people selling comics, if you're selling your entire comic collection, but it also began featuring advertisements. And I remember I set an ad in for number 1, and I think it cost me $5, and you got like a half-page ad, and it was in an early issue of the Buyer's Guide. So all of a sudden, I got all these orders.
Yeah.
You know, everybody's sending me a quarter, and
yeah, I never did that.
And I'm like, wow, this is pretty cool. You know, I can make enough money to go buy a bag of potato chips now. You know.
Yeah. Yeah, I never mastered the distribution of small press comics. I just had struggled with that ever since I've been doing them. Doesn't stop me from making comics.
I mean, that's one reason when I joined the UFO, called the BPP back in those days, but it originally began by Carl Gafford, who went on to work for DC Comics as a colorist, and but Carl originally began the group as a way to just exchange fanzines with each other, exchange comics and small press zines. And you know, if you were a member of the group, you would send everybody in the group a copy of your book, and they would send you one back. So all of a sudden, you got handfuls of comics, small press comics, and it was a lot of fun. I mean, of course, that still goes on to this day. I'm not here to hype the UFO. I'm just saying it's still around, and we're still doing it. We still love exchanging comics with each other. Nobody's making any money, but we're having a blast. And we're seeing a lot of creative people do creative work.
Yeah. Well, now let's see. What else are they asking us here? Kind of to wrap things up, they have a few questions. What do you miss about those days? And I have to say, you know, having a P.O. box and the anticipation of going over to the P.O. box and finding out what's in there, that was always exciting for me. In those days, you know, we were sending stuff through the mail to each other, and
right. There was no internet. There was no internet, and if you wanted to contribute to somebody else's book, you would send your artwork, the actual artwork, and you would send it to them, and it would take a couple of weeks before they would receive it, and then you get a letter back like 2 weeks later, and everything went at a snail's pace. I mean, we thought it was just fine, you know, but now, looking back, the speed of the internet and how we can get things done now is just incredible. It's nothing we ever imagined.
They're saying, tell us one more memory, smother us with anecdotes. Well, the only other memory I have, I took a turn at producing the White Buffalo Gazette.
Yay, that was a good one too.
No, this is 2001, so we just got out of the 90s, but this was quite a deal. And incidentally, here is on the back of this, Hector by Tom Motley, and Tom Motley has a interview on this very channel. So,
yeah, that's right.
He sent me this for the back, and I had a whole group of people sending me stuff. Here's one from David Lasky.
Yep.
A strange-looking fellow. But that's how I took it over from Ed Bowman, and
Ed Bowman, Ted Bowman, yeah.
yeah, I took it over from him, and I produced right before. I'm trying to think. This is a Jeff Zennick White Buffalo, and I think he did it maybe before. I think I took it over from. Come to think of it, I took it over from Jeff Zennick, but Ed
I think that's what you told me
also
before, yeah.
been doing it, and he sent me a letter about you're probably going to regret doing this because nobody will buy it. And he was pretty much right. It was mostly I printed it up and sent it to the people that contributed to it. That's how it wound up being. But I did it for a year and a half, produced this. And here's all the people in this issue that contributed. You can see all kinds of
people. We had a lot of contributors.
Yeah, lots of them.
On the left, that looks pretty familiar. On the other side, who's that artwork? I know who it is.
That's Steve.
I'm drawing a blank, but I know who it is. I recognize it completely.
Steve Skeets. I knew it was close to
Skeets.
Yeah, I knew it was close to Keeter.
Steve Skeets, of course.
Steve Skeets, yeah. Steve.
I worked with him a few times over the years. He even wrote a comic. He worked for DC Comics and stuff. He didn't work for you.
Everybody and their brother was in these things. I really enjoyed doing them. And the interesting thing was, they weren't numbered. They weren't numbered. They were, you would like issue number, stories and such, right here. That was the issue number, stories and such. So they weren't numbered.
Issue number, stories and such.
Yeah, they were not numbered. They were just named. Yeah.
This is an early one. I think I'll throw it out there. It isn't 80s or 90s, but it was 1977. This was an issue of my Mantra. Yeah, what my anthology title had a cover by Al Hanley. Al Hanley had a style kind of similar to C.C. Beck, who did Captain Marvel back in the 40s and 50s.
Wow.
And in fact, he was at one point he was in line to become an artist for Captain Marvel for Shazam. And he did that cover. And, and it has awesome artwork by myself. Here it is.
Oh, yeah.
Superhero named Eggman. But somebody discovered that if you cook Eggman, you can have a tasty breakfast. So I did that one. I'm just throwing that out there because we're talking about old comics. And this makes me nostalgic. So, yeah. I also did a review zine, Skeets Fan Forum and Review.
Oh, yeah. What year was that?
This particular issue, it's going to be early 80s. 90s. 1994.
94.
And this was full of reviews. I reviewed small press comics in two, not quite on the scale of something like Tim Corrigan's zines or Fact Sheet 5, but there's some artwork by Jeff Gator back in those days. But I published like 11 issues of this, and it was a lot of work. I did the same thing that Tim Corrigan did. Now Tim was quite a trooper.
Oh boy!
His magazines were huge.
Yeah.
And
hand-typed.
And you remember the type was very small. And it was also typed not on a computer. It was typed on an old manual typewriter, and he typed everything.
Yeah.
And unbelievable the amount of effort that he put into. I mean, I did it too, but as I said, not quite on the scale that he did. And that was enough work for me. When he decided,
that when he drew his comics, which he was just as fast and just as prolific with his comics as he was with the review zine, he said he would sit in his chair in front of the TV, watch TV, and draw his comics. Well, I could never do that, but that's what he did. His comics were perfect and lettered perfect. He was an amazing guy. He really was.
We really missed that guy. What a brilliant talent. He brought so many people into the small press network.
Yeah.
Uh,
He was known as the father of the small press, so, and he surely
yeah,
was.
one of the
Yeah.
fathers, for darn sure. That's for darn sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, they're asking if we know 3 people that they should contact for doing one of these. These are actually called the
Archives.
90s Mini Comics Oral History Project with the Sequential Artist Workshop. So they're
3
asking
people.
for if you know 3 people that might, they might contact. So I just really quickly here wrote down Jason DeGroot, Larry Johnson, and Terry Flippo. So those
That's
would be 3 that I would say
3 terrific, wonderful
they
creators.
should contact. Do you have anybody you can think of real quick? That was the top 3 that came to mind to me. Kel Crum would be another one, come to think of it.
3 people we should contact. Rob Imes in the UFO.
Yeah.
He has an extensive history of small press
Right,
comics.
yes.
And he's rather younger, like 15 years younger than me, but he has a great knowledge of small press. So he would be one as well. I don't know. There's a lot of people out there.
Oh, yeah, there's all kinds of them. They just asked for a couple names, and I thought I would list those. Well,
Larry
I think
Justin
we
is a
have
good
done it. I
choice.
think we covered everything we were supposed to in the interview. I hope so. And I think we will say goodbye, and we will maybe see you next time somewhere, somehow.
Sounds like a good deal. Hope you guys enjoyed this. We had fun.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening. This is the 80s, 90s pre-internet mini comics oral history archives. This is a project of the Sequential Artists Workshop, or SAW. You can find out more about this project or about the courses we offer, the programs we offer in comics and visual literacy and graphic novels at sawcomics.org. That's SAWCOMICS.org. You can find out how to support this project through the donate button. You can also support us on Patreon at Saw Comics. You can find more of this on our YouTube channel or through various places where you get your podcasts. You can find archives of this at the University of Florida and at our other partner institutions. And waving at you from the past, this is Tom Hart, the director of the Sequential Artists Workshop. Thanks so much for listening.